Today, we're talking about how to manage a team of data scientists. It's a crucial topic. We're speaking with Bülent Kiziltan, who is one of the most articulate and outspoken data scientists that I know.
Thank you. Great to be on the show again, Michael.
Give us a flavor of your background to set some context for us.
I'm trained as a physicist and an astronomer. I've spent my career searching for neutron stars and black holes. And during that pursuit, I used different aspects of applied math and machine learning for more than 20 years. And now I'm applying those skills in the industry.
All right, so I'm hoping that the topic we talk about today is going to be a little bit less complex than looking for neutrons and black holes. But hey, we're talking about people, so maybe it's more complex.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay, so Bülent, what is unique about data science, unique about AI when it comes to building teams and managing teams?
Right. First and foremost, it's a new domain for the business and the industry. So there is a lot of experimentation going on. A strategy when it comes to managing, building data science teams and creating value with those teams is still in its infancy. So there's a lot of experimentation. Companies change strategies all the time, and there's no single answer. There's no single right answer. So bigger companies versus smaller companies, industry domains matter a lot, and the culture is very, very important. And I think we're going to talk about that as well.
Is there a distinction between managing data science and managing AI? I think there's a lot of confusion between those two things.
Right. Just a few days ago, I wanted to go online and look what people say on blogs about AI, data science, analytics. What are the differences? And once you go through the blogs and the information in the internet, it's really confusing. And all of those posts have a certain level of truth and correctness in them. But mainly, it's an area that's very new to the industry. AI is a more generic term that is considered more general and umbrella term that sits above data science, and data science typically would sit above analytics in terms of its comprehensiveness, if you will. But there's a lot of confusion, and when it comes to etymology and how the context of a word changes, I think a culture and the industry will play its part. So it's currently reshaping itself. There are overlapping things about all those three areas. There are things that are very different about all those three.
But are there, from a management standpoint, do we need to think about them in very unique ways?
I think not based on whether it's called AI, data science, or analytics. But I think what is more important in managing data science teams, if you will, is in what type of company and what type of domain you're operating in. Depending on the business objectives, I think one can come up with a more appropriate designation for the team. For instance, data science versus analytics.
All right, so I think that sets the stage, and fundamentally, the issue is one of this being a new domain, and so we're still trying to figure it out. So is that the correct sort of ground level beginning that we need to start from?
That's one important aspect, but another aspect of this is data science is science, and it is still a hybrid of an academic culture and a business culture. So companies have hard time hitting the right balance that aligns well with their business objectives. And this is one area that we all are struggling, and we're experimenting with hitting the right cultural balance within an operation. And I would say one can come up with the most interesting a strategy, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if the culture is not set right, you cannot execute on the strategy that you're thinking of.
Let's talk about the ROI and the organizational expectations for a team that's being managed. And organizationally, where should a data science team or a data science department fit inside a company?
If I were to think like only like an academic. I would say they should be independent. Obviously, people who have been in the industry for a very long time, they have a different mindset. So depending on the company size and their business objectives, it could be considered as a supporting department. And then many companies have data science operating under engineering, but their business objectives are, I would imagine, more short term. AI has delivered on its promises. It's creating a lot of ROI, and executives and the companies are well aware of what the ROI can be if analytics operations or data science operations can set their strategy independently of the engineering strategies, because engineers have different priorities as opposed to analytics folks or data science folks. So in my opinion, now we are at the stage where AI or data science or analytics operations should be independently reporting to the board, or be represented at the C level at least, regardless of the size of the company.
I want to remind everybody that we're speaking with Bülent Kiziltan, and we're talking about how to manage AI and data science organizations. What are the unique aspects of this? Bülent, the kind of expectations that companies have of their AI departments or their data science departments, you made a distinction between the business expectations and the technology or the engineering expectations. Can you elaborate on that?
Everybody knows there is a certain level of hype that comes with AI or data science. And early when this hype started, we had seen some justified skepticism from high-level business executives, because the teams that were formed were not essentially executing or delivering the ROI. So I would say there were some unrealistic expectations at the beginning, but right now we are at the level where we can utilize more mature tools. The talent pool has diversified itself. It's still there's not enough talent out there, but we hire data scientists from very different profiles, and data science, I would say, that is more of a creative process than an engineering process. An engineering process requires creativity as well, but I think that creative aspect is very dominant in data science processes. So an engineering mindset typically has an output and input, and they are, generically speaking, trying to optimize that whole process. Whereas data science, if managed properly and has an aligned vision with the company, is about discovery, extracting new information. So that is very different from a sole engineering operations perspective. So this is why I think companies who are trying to make an impact, who are trying to come up with a disruptive innovation on the large scale or on the small scale, I think are moving in the direction where data science operations now are led by domain experts that really have done data science, have written code, and they're leading the data science operations by example. And this is why we have all sorts of titles floating around. So that leader type is also very scarce right now. But people and leaders who are domain experts in data science or AI, but also have a business acumen and experience, are the leaders that are highly sought after today.
You mentioned that data science needs to be aligned with the goals of the organization.
Right.
Please talk about that. That seems like a very crucial dimension here.
So there are, I think, two extremes when it comes to building a data science strategy. One extreme is the academic mindset, where you do research for long-term impact. And the other extreme is the short-term pragmatism that comes with short-term deliverables in the business setting. I think in data science operations, The balance has to be set right to align with the business objectives of any company. There are larger companies such as Google and Facebook, which have the resources to make midterm and long-term investments only. So they have research teams that really operate like academic institutions. Most of the companies don't have those resources. They don't have those objectives. So any leader who is coming in, I think, has to first and foremost identify the business objective and what sort of short-term, midterm, and long-term deliverables he can deliver to the board in order to justify the operation's existence. So this is very important. On the other side, and we see that more often than not, is data science, AI, or analytics operations are managed by non-domain experts, and I would call them managers. And there are some pragmatic reasons why you would want a person that doesn't have a data science background but has really the business experience, especially in larger companies, mainly because the value that one can create is most often hindered by the internal dynamics and the stakeholders. So a leader that goes into a bigger company has to really consider the balance of different stakeholders and convince them, and that comes with business experience. So I think the right balance is somewhere in between, where you really deliver on the short term, and there are lots of low-hanging fruits in all sorts of business settings, especially in larger companies. So a smart leader would focus on delivering the short term and invest in the long term.
Given the importance of aligning the data science efforts, and you could say the same thing, I'm sure, for AI, given the importance of that, can you share with us any examples where the business goals, where the data science efforts were not aligned with the business goals, and what's the kind of outcome that then happens?
So I will talk about what we generally see in larger companies today is data science and analytics efforts are led by non-domain experts. So they don't know much about data science itself, but they know really how to manage groups, how to maybe build groups, and how to talk to different stakeholders internally. And through that relationship, they can justify their existence and large budgets by delivering on the short term. So when you have an AI manager, if you will, I wouldn't call them leaders. If you have a manager that has a sole business objective and business background, they will have the short-sightedness that comes with the business pragmatism. They will go after the low-hanging fruit only because this is how they have been operating, and delivering it to the business executives. But data science operations, especially when it comes to sustaining the value that AI promises, requires long-term investment. And one of that investment is to attract talent and to retain that talent. So if you have a data science operation that focuses on short-term goals only without giving the data scientists creative space, those folks will be very difficult to be retained in any type of operations. So in that relationship, an employer has to ask what type of value do I bring to the table, and do I invest in the continual mentorship and training of the data scientists. In different domains, the domain knowledge that the company has adds to the employee. But within data science, one of the nice things about data science is it's somewhat domain agnostic. So when a data scientist comes on board, they will build the required domain knowledge, whether you're in healthcare or in finance. But what they do and the value that they create is not directly related to that domain expertise. So they know their worth, and they can switch from one domain to another. So as an employer, the companies have to really consider how to retain that talent. And there are methods one can do that. And there's a clear ROI case to build a culture in which data scientists collaborate rather than compete. It's more human-centric. And there is an academic aspect to that operation, is because If you are looking just at the skill set of data scientists and work them 150%, that skill set will become obsolete in 6 months. So a continual training, an environment in which intellectually they get enriched is essential in any type of data science operations, in my opinion.
So let's shift gears here and talk about data science talent. First off, why is this such an important issue?
It's a new domain, and there are a lot of people who are trying to come into that domain from very diverse perspectives, very diverse trainings, and I think all of them bring an important aspect from their own domain into the creative process of doing data science. So having folks with psychology background, having a data scientist coming from a math background or an astrophysics background, they all bring in interesting ideas. And as I said, data science is more about the creative process and problem solving than just using certain tools. I mean, how to know how to use certain tools is important, but what is more important is problem solving skills. And each diverse background brings an interesting aspect and perspective to the problem solving process. So that is very important. But one of the negative sides of being a new domain is every data scientist is an above average in one of those three aspects when it comes to statistics, code writing, or the domain expertise when it comes to contributing to a problem solving a certain domain. So there has to be a continual training for data scientists, and I value very much diverse backgrounds, and that is one of my approaches to building data science teams. Diversity is very important.
You've mentioned culture several times now as being really important. And we have a question from Twitter. Arsalan Khan asks, how do you create an AI-focused culture when employees are fearful that their jobs will be taken away by that AI?
By that AI? Well, so the fear that AI will come and take jobs is largely unjustified, I think. Some folks who are popularizing AI, they come up with figures and claim that AI will take away jobs. And I ask them, what's the data? I mean, how do you justify that claim? I don't know whether AI will take away jobs, but what I know for sure is the demographics and how the labor market is going to look in 5 years will be very different from today. But just looking back in innovations that are similar to AI, like the invention of electricity or engines in the past, it changed the labor market dramatically, but did it diminish the labor market in numbers? I don't think so. I don't think that AI in general will have a negative impact on the job security for the future. So I think that fear is not justified. This has to be addressed. But setting the culture, I think that fear is not the most important issue. The most important issue is to create an environment which is collaborative and human-centric, and it's intellectually very rich, mainly because the problems that we're facing today are very complex, and we need creative ideas to solve those problems. And data science, AI, machine learning is providing very powerful tools to solve those problems. And people coming in with all sorts of different backgrounds are bringing in something that's valuable. So as a leader, we have to make sure that each individual's opinion is valued. The merit of the opinion wins over the title. And this is my approach to things. So ideas are very important. And, data science is a new domain. None of us is formally trained in data science. Everybody brings in something differently, which has value.
What about the relationship between academics and data science inside, say, especially large companies, but I think it's probably equally true for smaller venture-funded startups.
Yes. The bleeding edge know-how is still created and produced within academic settings or in larger companies that operate like academic institutions. So we have to consider this if you want to continue and sustain the value that data science creates for companies. So I'm an advocate to continue the relationship with my colleagues from the academic institutions and building really productive relationships both ways. So there is a lot that we can learn from folks that are operating in academia. I still read the archive every day and see what's coming out in my own domain, in both domains, in astrophysics and in data science or AI related fields, but also create a relationship with them that gives them incentives to contribute to solving problems in the industry. And some bigger companies have find different solutions for that, where they fund academics full-time, or they give them the resources so that they don't have to think about bringing grants and focus on problem solving, which is their main job. But in any setting, in smaller companies or bigger companies, I think there has to be some sort of an ongoing a productive relationship with the academic world in order to sustain the value that AI is bringing today.
What about smaller companies? How do smaller companies manage? I mean, it's clear with a large company, they have the resources to do that. But what about a smaller company?
Smaller companies actually hire directly folks with very, very strong academic backgrounds. Larger companies, on the other hand, because they have internal dynamics and silos, they typically hire people who are not domain experts in data science, but are business managers. So I don't think startups have a problem in building that relationship very informally and casually with academic institutions, because this is their main source where they hire that talent. Whereas bigger companies, they have their own problems bringing academics into their operations.
It sounds like you're a big fan of the kind of work that's done, innovation, put it that way, inside smaller companies.
That's right. I mean, I've operated and worked in both domains, if you will, in the startup space and in bigger companies. Both have pros and cons, positive and negative aspects to their operations. But when it comes to innovation, I think moving quickly is very important. And startups, they don't have the stigma of having different silos. They are very flat in terms of hierarchy. So they can produce and make that impact really quickly. And time is an important asset today, especially when it comes to AI. Things are changing on a weekly basis. So you have to be quick. Having larger companies, having a lot of people to manage, internal dynamics to overcome is a lot of wasted time and resources for bigger companies. So this is why I've seen a trend where bigger companies are acquiring smaller companies for their AI operations, or they're having a more organic merger with different companies. So smaller companies definitely have their advantages when it comes to innovation.
The challenge that small companies face is they have speed, they can move quickly, but they often don't have the resources that large companies do. And so what are you seeing inside smaller companies when it comes to AI and data science to let them overcome that lack of the lack of resources?
That's correct. The lack of resources is one of the disadvantages smaller companies have. And one important resource that bigger companies have is access to data. And data is currency when it comes to doing data science. So bigger companies cannot move fast, whereas smaller companies can move really quickly. So depending on the problem that they're working on, sometimes working with smaller teams is more advantageous than working with bigger teams, to be honest. So as long as smaller companies have access to data, I think the day-to-day operations, the hardware requirements are not that enormous, and you don't need an army of data scientists to address a certain problem or come up with an interesting solution. So I think the asset that bigger companies have is the data that they're owning, and smaller companies have the speed. So I encourage companies to build synergistic relationships in that regard.
That's a really interesting point. Smaller companies have speed and larger companies have data. That's a uniquely AI focused proposition today.
I think, yes, it's very different from what we've seen until the emergence of data science, how that relationship worked. I think startups today have a lot of leverage doing data science and AI as long as they have access to that data. And sometimes the data is being produced in academic settings. And this is why we see a lot of academics and professors who are building companies, startups, and moving quickly and producing value that way.
Let's talk about finding data scientists. When I speak with executives, the lack of resources seems to be a constant complaint.
There's definitely a lack of talent. I mean, that's for sure. But I think an important a part of the searching process is how the recruitment process works. And what I've seen in companies, especially bigger companies, their recruitment teams still use the old-fashioned way of going after data scientists, and most of the time they're missing the real talent. They're searching for certain keywords. They're looking for a certain type of experience that is not out there and is not essentially required in the data science operation. So I think reforming and restructuring and retraining the HR and the recruiters, I think, is an important part in proactively going after the data science talent. I mean, they're looking at the wrong places most of the time.
What are the wrong places and what are the right places?
I mean, how they scan CVs, for instance, they're looking for certain keywords like Python and scikit-learn that anybody can put on their CV. But it's very difficult to gauge the creative aspect of a certain individual. So there are metrics that one can use to gauge the creativity that an individual has. But I'm a face-to-face person, so a 5-minute face-to-face meeting is worth any type of strategy in recruitment. So meeting a person in face-to-face and talking to them gives a lot of insight in what type of person they are, how they go after a certain type of problem. Many companies are filtering based on certain skill sets, and I think that's the wrong way to go about searching talented data scientists.
So the problem is many recruiters are searching for specific languages, as an example, none of which can point to creativity. And creativity is so essential.
That's right. I mean, in data science, in my opinion, what language you use in most of the use cases, the language is not relevant. I advise them to use the language that they are most comfortable with. And when it comes to certain tools, they're looking for tools. I mean, tools are being produced on a weekly basis. They're dynamically changing. So what you put on your CV today is becoming irrelevant in a couple of months, and there's a new tool. So what I look for is creativity and the willingness to learn rather than a certain keyword on your CV. And I think recruiters, most of them are going about this the wrong way.
Is that any different from hiring software developers?
Yes, it is. It is somewhat different. So in software development, things are more mature. Experience is very important, and the process is really well defined. Whereas data science operations, as I said, is still in its experimentation, and there's no single answer. I mean, you can take very similar to companies based on their leadership and management style. You have to hire different people that align better with the culture of the particular company. So it's a very dynamic domain, and one cannot go about this in a deterministic manner. You really have to meet the candidate and talk to them. Obviously, the screening is very important, and we really appreciate the efforts of recruiters and how they help us in the hiring process. But we have to go about data science hiring in a different way.
What makes a company attractive to a data scientist if you want to set up the right kind of environment to attract folks?
Yeah. Everybody has a different background. They have different experiences that they bring to the table. For me, for instance, right now, I think what I focus on is the culture. Either the culture has to be uh, right for the data scientist. And when I mean right, I mean a place where they can continually learn, where they can bring interesting ideas to the table and the ideas are being valued. The merit of the idea is more important than the title of a person, an intellectually rich environment. And then obviously the problems that they're working on, how interesting they are, is important for people to choose one company over other. Uh, if a company doesn't set the culture right, as I said, the turnover will be very high, which is a very high cost for companies. And that high turnover will uh, make a data scientist question whether it's a right choice or not. So if a company has a high number of turnover, they have to really rethink about they have to rethink their strategy and approach to data science in general, in my opinion.
Arsalan Khan on Twitter makes a really interesting point. He says very often HR is not equipped to hire data scientists because they don't know enough to evaluate who is good and who is not. I think this gets back to the point that you raised earlier that scanning for keywords on a CV or a resume does not help you evaluate the creativity or the potential of that person at all.
Right and wrong. Certainly, he is right when it comes to domain expertise. They don't. But recruiters and HR is not required to be a domain expert when they are screening the candidate. And how they screened in the past based on keywords regarding domains that are mature, like software development or certain types of engineering, should be very different than looking for a particular type and profile of a data scientist, is what I'm saying. They don't require domain expertise to do that.
What you're essentially saying is you need to be looking for innovation potential.
Right. I mean, for instance, has a person operated in different domains and still remain productive? I think that's an important metric to gauge the learning willingness of a candidate and the creativity of a candidate. If a person has, if they come from an academic background, have they produced academic work in different topics, for instance, is an important metric. If they have been in the industry, have they been in different domains? If they have remained in the same domain for 15 years, that makes them a really deep domain expert. But will this make a person the right candidate for data science? I don't think so.
Gus Bekdash on Twitter makes a really interesting point. He says one principle that's helped him in the past is looking at the kinds of problems that a person has solved. What do you think about that?
Yes, but not everybody has the luxury to choose the problems that they want to work on, both in the academic setting, in the industry setting as well. So I kind of evaluate this more dynamically. I look into the problem. It has a certain weight. Certainly, they have some leverage in choosing it. But once they're in an operation, typically they are assigned certain problems, and I look at what they have brought to the solution.
So is that's the key? Is it's not just the problem they're working on, but the nature of the solution that they're applying.
Absolutely, and this also will give an insight into how you can build your CV and make it more transparent to a hiring manager. You should probably include some of the relevant solutions that you brought to a certain type of problem, and I think that is very relevant.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting point. So what you're really trying to do is help the hiring manager gain insight into the way that you think.
Yes, and that's a very tough one. So it's a challenge for everyone, including recruiters, including hiring managers. So it is an area that we also keep experimenting. I mean, some companies, they have online challenges, coding challenges, which work or it doesn't work. I don't like online challenges, but I like to sit down with candidates and stay in front of a board and have a conversation, focus on some problem and see how they think. But this is a very subjective process. I agree with that. So this is why data science candidates should not be discouraged if they're turned down by certain companies, because everybody has a different approach. It doesn't reflect their worth. So it's a very subjective process.
One of the issues I think that comes up, especially in larger companies, and you alluded to this earlier, is that the aspect of data science can get lost relative to the importance of process and corporate flow and desire to look good and so forth.
That's right. This is why choosing the right leader is very important. My approach to leadership is to lead by example. So I would imagine a leader who really has written code and models and knows about a process itself is an important asset in this regard to hit the right balance when it comes to focusing on short-term business objectives and deliverables, and then also investing in the long-term future. If the manager of a certain type of data science operations is focused only on one aspect, whether it be R&D for the long term or just short-term deliverables, I think we'll face some hardship in the midterm. So in big companies, as I said, because the domain experts have operated mainly in academic settings, have somewhat limited business experience compared to managers or consultants or executives who have been in the industry for decades. You cannot compare their business experience for sure. But I think what is more important is to bring a person that has a reputable domain expertise and has business acumen, leadership skills as well, and invest into that person if you want to break ground using AI.
And the ultimate issue is, as you say, is how are we breaking ground, right? And that's very different from, say, developing traditional enterprise software business applications.
Yes, breaking ground, I mean, everybody has a different approach to breaking ground or doing disruptive innovation. But what I've seen in many companies is when it comes to AI, when you look at the nuts and bolts of what they actually do, sometimes what they promise is actually not there. So, and this has to do with not having the right talent or not having the right level of investment into AI. But they want to move in the right direction. So that's an understandable position to take, where they advertise a vision and they're trying to build a team that can align with that vision, which is very important. But it's I think critically important to have the right leader that is setting the tone for the culture. Leader versus manager is very important. Go after the leaders that have some domain expertise.
What about at the senior level inside a company, at the board level, the senior executive level, folks who are setting the goals for the business? How does that translate down into AI efforts and data science efforts?
Again, I think the leader who is managing data science operations is critically important here. The person has to be an educator coming from a background in which they have operated at a level where they can break down technical stuff to simple terms. And this is how a leader that is operating within data science has to talk with the board. I mean, you cannot just go about deep learning networks and talk about backpropagation in the board meeting. With startup companies, this may not be a big problem, but with bigger companies, I think the communication skill plays a critical role when the data science leader comes to the meeting and talks about the objectives that they have and how it aligns with the business objectives. And on the other side of the table, it requires an executive board and a CEO that is willing to learn. I mean, we had this conversation before. We live at a time in which every business leader has to be articulate and learn some aspects of machine learning and AI in order to make the right decision. If it's a person that is not open to learning, that doesn't value the best ideas, but is looking for a certain type of presentation, or looks at the fonts and the colors of a PowerPoint rather than look at the content of the PowerPoint. I think that's the place where that relationship can break ground or fail.
So isn't this really just like, IT folks? I mean, I don't see, how is this different from the historical problem that technical folks have had communicating with business people? It seems like that's the same issue.
When it comes to communicating, I think, the problems are similar, but the business objectives and the investment types and the strategies are very different. So there will be a certain structure of communication and a certain expectations from the board that they are used to. So the leader, the data science leader, either conforms into this expectation, I think, which is the wrong way to do. The data science leader has to be bold, but also has to align the business objectives of the data science operations with the board. So what the data science leader brings to the table will be very different from an IT leader.
As we finish up, can you describe those differences between managing an IT function like the CIO, for example, and managing an AI or a data science operation?
I don't want to talk too much about the IT folks because it's not my area of expertise, I would say, per se. But I would imagine that the IT infrastructure is much more mature. The day-to-day expectation, how they set up certain goals is more set, as opposed to a domain such as data science, in which the leader has to reinvent himself or herself on a weekly basis. You basically have to encourage your team to fail, but fail quickly, rather than in IT, that margin for failure might be very, very small. As opposed to in data science, we are experimenting quite a bit. And so there is a certain overhead that comes with that experimentation. So we face a different type of challenges, but by no means I don't want to say IT leadership is less challenging. I mean, we all face different challenges.
That is certainly the truth. As we finish up, Bülent, any final thoughts on this topic?
Data science, AI, machine learning, analytics is a great place to be. So, and I see a lot of younger people who are moving into the field. I want to encourage them to move in. Most of the people who are coming in, they're suffering from a syndrome where they think, they are not properly trained as a data scientist, so they are less worth as opposed to more formally trained computer scientists. I don't think this is the case, and a diverse background has a lot of business value. And from a leader's perspective, creating that creative space for data scientists, regardless of their level, produces a lot of ROI. It has business value that comes with it. So I encourage the leaders to create that space for the incoming data scientists, invest into their continual training if you want to sustain the value that you have produced in the short term.
Okay, Bülent Kiziltan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a very fascinating discussion.
It's been a pleasure, Michael.
You have been watching this interesting discussion on how do we manage data science and artificial intelligence operations. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe on YouTube to our YouTube channel and go to cxotalk.com to see more videos, and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and check out our videos, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.